The first thunderclap hit like a gavel. Rain struck the glass walls of Harlow and Finch, streaking light across the polished floor. The city outside looked distant, a blur of gold towers and broken reflections. Inside, everything was quiet, too quiet for a place built on noise and status. Martin Veers sat alone at his corner table, his jacket folded across the chair beside him, the remnants of a $300 dinner untouched. He stared into the dark window as if watching himself disappear in it. He was not used to silence. At 60, the billionaire CEO of Veers Global had built an empire on movement. Meetings, decisions, handshakes that turned into signatures. But tonight his calendar was empty by his own order. He wanted peace. The restaurant, closed to the public, had kept its lights on for him. Power bought that kind of obedience. Only one waitress remained. Her name tag read Lena. She moved carefully as if sound itself could shatter. The storm rattled the building again, and she steadied a wine glass before it tipped. Her hands were steady, but her eyes kept shifting toward the windows, toward the street below. Something was wrong, Martin noticed. "You can go," he said without looking up. "The manager can close out the bill." "The manager left," she said softly. "You're the last one here." Her tone wasn't defiant, just factual. Still, it bothered him. He sighed, picked up his pen, and waited for the paper check. That was when she set it down, a simple slip of white, then paused instead of walking away. She looked at him directly. Her voice came out quiet, but clear enough to slice through the rain. "Run now." For a second, the world stopped moving. The lights above them flickered. Somewhere behind the kitchen door, a machine hummed and died. Only the storm spoke, tapping its code against the glass. Martin blinked. "Excuse me?" But Lena didn't repeat herself. Her hand rested on the edge of the table, trembling only once before she pulled it back. He saw the faint shimmer of water on her wrist. Not from the rain, but from sweat. "What did you say?" He pressed, half rising. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "Just please leave now." The words weren't angry. They sounded like mercy. He stared at her, uncertain whether to feel threatened or pitied. "Is this a joke? You know who I am?" She nodded. "That's why." Then she stepped away, fast, toward the back corridor. "Wait," he followed a few steps before stopping. The power surged again. The chandeliers blinked twice. His reflection in the mirror ceiling looked ghostly, doubled, distorted. On the table lay the check slip, the kind printed by machines, clean and crisp. But across its surface, a strange set of dark blue numbers bled through the ink, written by hand. He frowned. Not a total, not a code he knew. Just 4 digits and a smudge, as if rushed. He took out his phone, no signal. The city outside flickered as transformers flashed along the skyline. Lena was gone. The air felt charged, thick as if the building itself held its breath. He tried to calm the rising pulse in his chest. Perhaps she was unstable, frightened by the storm. Yet the sound of her voice, controlled, deliberate, echoed back. "Run now." He looked again at the slip of paper. It fluttered slightly in the wind, leaking from a cracked window. The ink glowed faintly under the emergency light, the numbers sharp as a wound. He folded the slip, placed it in his pocket, and straightened his coat. The restaurant doors groaned as he pushed them open. Outside, the storm smelled like metal and smoke. In the distance, somewhere beneath the roar of thunder, came another sound. Brief, mechanical. Almost like an explosion swallowed by rain. Martin turned toward it. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar beneath his wealth and reason. Fear. He glanced once more at the folded check in his hand. Whatever Lena had meant, it wasn't over. And somewhere between the lightning and the dark, a question formed. A question he could no longer afford not to ask. Why should a billionaire need to run? The city looked clean from a distance. That was its trick. From the window of his armored car, Martin Veers watched the towers glow against the dawn haze. Rain had rinsed the streets to a mirror shine, but the light felt wrong, too sharp, like glass about to break. He told himself he didn't believe in omens. The waitress's words from last night, "Run now," still circled his mind like static he couldn't switch off. People said strange things to the rich all the time. Threats, prophecies, desperate requests. He'd learned to ignore them, but he hadn't ignored the check slip. It sat folded in his breast pocket, damp from the storm. At first he thought the numbers on it were a tip total, or some lazy math. But the more he looked, the more deliberate they appeared. 4 digits written with a pen that bled blue through the printed ink. Not random, not careless. He unfolded it again. Pindy says 019, meaningless. Yet the handwriting, tight, slanted, wasn't the handwriting of panic. It was a message. His phone buzzed. He glanced down. No service. Strange. His company paid for a private satellite network that rarely failed, even during storms. He tapped the screen again and the image froze mid-swipe. At that same instant, a faint vibration shuddered through the car floor, as if something heavy had detonated miles away. His driver twisted in his seat. "Sir, should we keep moving?" Martin said, though his voice lacked conviction. The car rolled past a bridge where emergency lights flashed in the distance. He looked away. He didn't like chaos before coffee. Then the car stopped. "Traffic control issue," said the driver, checking his earpiece. "They're rerouting," Martin sighed. He pulled out his other phone, the secure one, used only for internal matters. It blinked alive, showing a single message from Corporate Security Division. "Containment breach detected. Do not access central servers. Await further instruction." He frowned. Containment breach of what? His empire was built on systems, contracts, control. Words like breach didn't belong to his vocabulary. They belonged to others. He typed back, "Clarify." The reply came instantly. "Unverified source. Do not engage." His reflection stared back at him from the darkened screen, expressionless. For the first time in years, Martin Veers felt small inside his own invention. He looked again at the paper slip, tracing the numbers with his thumb. 2719, he murmured. His driver glanced at him in the mirror. "Sorry, sir?" "Nothing." But it wasn't nothing. The digits reminded him of something. An internal access code, maybe. He tried to place it. Was it from a division ID? A server port? His mind, sharp as a ledger, kept turning. He opened his laptop. The network rejected his login with an unfamiliar message. "Access locked. Unauthorized attempt logged." He froze. Locked out of his own system? Impossible. Unless someone inside had changed the root key. Lightning flickered through the tinted glass, and for a brief second, he saw his reflection doubled, the powerful man and the uncertain one staring at each other. He realized what unsettled him most. Not the numbers, not the glitch, but the voice that had delivered them. Calm, compassionate, not a threat. A warning. "Run now," he rubbed his temples. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was coincidence layered over fatigue. Yet beneath that logic, something older stirred. A sense he hadn't felt since the early years when he still worried about right and wrong. The car started moving again. Outside, digital billboards flashed his own company's logo. Veers Global, building tomorrow. He looked down at the receipt, its edges softening from the rain. Hidden in plain sight, an ordinary object now carried the weight of a secret. He slipped it back into his pocket, straightened his tie, and spoke quietly to himself. "If there's a trail, I'll find where it leads." But in his voice was a shadow of doubt, as if he already feared that the trail didn't lead away from danger, but straight toward it. The night smelled of bleach and fear. Lena Carter wiped down the counter for the 4th time, though it was already clean. The restaurant, Harlow and Finch, looked peaceful under its low amber lights, like a painting of calm. But behind that calm, she could hear what others couldn't. Whispers from the kitchen, the hum of secret meetings after hours, the truth hiding inside polished glass. She had learned to listen. For 3 years, she'd worked the night shift here, invisible to the men in suits who met in the private dining room. They saw only a uniform, never the woman inside it. That invisibility had become her shield. She moved trays, cleared glasses, and kept her ears open. It had started months ago when her neighborhood's water turned bitter. Kids got rashes. Fish floated up dead in the creek. The company trucks that dumped near the fence carried a logo she'd seen every night on business cards left behind by rich guests. Veers Global. She didn't plan to get involved. Not at first. She just wanted answers. But every door she knocked on closed fast. City officials brushed her off. Her manager told her to stop asking questions if she wanted to keep her job. One evening, he'd leaned too close and whispered, "You didn't hear what you think you heard. Understand?" She understood perfectly, silence was policy. But the world had already started talking in front of her. On a Tuesday night, slow, quiet, the rain slanting across the windows, two men in suits had stayed late in the corner booth. They spoke low, confident, careless. She pretended to refill their glasses while they talked. Words drifted through the clatter of cutlery. Short the stock. Accident report. Cover loss by morning. Then one name, Martin Veers, the man in charge. The one the city trusted. She didn't understand every part, but she understood enough. Someone planned to profit from destruction. Accident meant something was about to break, and people like her would pay the price. That night, she took out her small notebook, the one she kept hidden inside her apron pocket, and wrote down what she'd heard. Times, dates, phrases. She didn't know what to do with it, but writing made it real. It meant she wasn't imagining the danger. Still, fear had a way of whispering back, "Stay quiet." For weeks she carried the secret alone. The other waitstaff joked about power and money, but none of them believed power could be stopped. She almost didn't either, until she saw the reservation list for Thursday night. A single name, Table 14. Martin Veers, the same man who owned the trucks, the silence, and the accidents. The same man who could stop it, if he ever saw what people like her saw. When his assistant called to confirm his private dinner, Lena felt the weight of every night shift press against her chest. That was the moment she decided. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because fear had already stolen too much. She would warn him. Maybe he would laugh. Maybe she would lose her job. But if the thing they planned for morning went through, she wouldn't be able to live with herself. She slipped the folded note into her apron, the one with the numbers she'd copied from the manager's file cabinet, the code to the containment site. Outside, thunder rolled across the skyline. The lights flickered once like a signal. She looked at her reflection in the empty dining room window. Tired eyes, damp curls, steady breath, and whispered to herself, "They think no one's watching." Then she turned off the lights, locked her station, and prepared to serve the most important table of her life. Power was his native language. Silence was its accent. Martin Veers had built an empire out of both. He didn't lie, he simply left things unsaid. In the boardrooms of Veers Global, silence carried weight. It ended arguments, erased guilt, and turned moral questions into business strategy. Martin's people had learned to read his pauses the way sailors read the wind. A single look from him could cancel a contract or save a fortune. But this morning his silence felt different, heavy, almost foreign. He sat in his penthouse office staring at the folded check slip on his desk. The numbers still glared up at him. 2719. His assistants moved quietly around him, speaking in rehearsed tones, careful not to disturb the air. "Sir, the board wants to confirm the press statement," one said. "Draft it," Martin replied. "Use the usual language." The assistant nodded, understanding without further instruction. "We regret the event," was how Veers Global expressed accountability. The company never said what the event was. Words like spill, collapse, casualties, those were for other people to say. He used to admire that efficiency. Now it made his stomach tighten. Martin rose from his chair and looked out at the city. Below him, glass towers sparkled in neat rows. He could see the river bending through the industrial zone, the one his companies had reclaimed. That word again. A clean word for dirty work. His reflection stared back from the window. Sharp suit, calm eyes, perfect control. A man who'd won. Yet in the reflection's pocket was that single piece of paper, damp and wrinkled, like a truth refusing to disappear. He turned to his chief of staff, a loyal man named Harris, the waitress last night. Find out who she was. Harris hesitated, caught off guard. "A waitress, sir." "Yes, name's Lena, Harlow and Finch. She said something strange to me." "I'll handle it," Harris said quickly, already typing. "If she caused any disturbance, we'll make sure—" "No!" Martin interrupted, sharper than intended. "Just find her." The room stilled. It was the first time anyone had heard him give an order without an outcome attached. Normally he wanted results, not people. As Harris left, Martin replayed the memory. Lena's eyes, steady, not angry. Her voice, low but clear. "Run now." He had dismissed it as nonsense. Now it felt like the one honest sentence he'd heard in years. Across the room, a television ran muted news footage. The ticker mentioned temporary closures at one of his subsidiary plants. He knew that phrase too. Temporary closure meant disaster wrapped in polite words. He turned up the sound. The anchor said the plant had been under inspection for waste mismanagement. A reporter tried to question a spokesperson who replied, "We're still gathering data." Still gathering data. He felt a chill as he remembered Lena's note, the coded numbers. Maybe the story wasn't random. Maybe she knew. Martin sank back into his chair. He thought of his early years, how he'd once been the hungry young man who promised to do business differently. But every success had demanded a small compromise, and every compromise had built a wall between him and conscience. Now, behind that wall, he could barely hear his own thoughts. The phone buzzed. "Harris again. Sir, about that waitress. There's no record of her on staff. No payroll entry, nothing." Nothing? Like she never worked there at all. The call ended. Martin looked again at the slip. For the first time, the silence he'd mastered felt like a trap instead of a tool. He folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his coat pocket. His reflection watched him do it, its face unreadable. Then, with a steadiness that surprised even him, he said aloud to the empty room, "I'm going to find her." And for once, the silence didn't answer back. Truth was supposed to leave a trace, but when Martin Veers tried to find it, the record was already gone. He stood in the dim glow of the Security Operations Center, a windowless room buried 3 floors beneath Veers' global headquarters. Rows of screens flickered with silent feeds, warehouses, data centers, ports. All monitored, all controlled, yet the one camera he needed most showed only static. "The footage from Harlow and Finch," he said. "Where is it?" His head of security, Dana Holt, didn't look up from the console. "We've been searching for an hour, sir. The system registered a deletion at 02:17 a.m. That's after the restaurant closed. Who authorized it?" "No one," she said. "At least not officially." Martin leaned closer to the screen. The timestamp rolled forward, a silent countdown of missing seconds, whole minutes erased like they'd never existed. He folded his arms. "Run recovery," Holt hesitated. "Already tried. The source drive was wiped manually, physically. Someone pulled the data core." The word physically landed like a threat. Harlow and Finch wasn't one of his own holdings. It was a high-end client venue that served his executives and visiting partners. Security there should have been routine. But if someone had gone in and removed drives by hand, it wasn't random vandalism. It was precision. Martin's jaw tightened. "Contact the owner. I want their logs." Within the hour, a video call filled the main screen. The restaurant's owner appeared, a polished man with perfect posture and polite fear behind his eyes. "Mr. Veers, what an honor," the owner began. "Is there an issue?" "Yes," Martin said evenly. "One of your employees, Lena Carter. She served me last night. I need confirmation she works for you." A pause. The owner blinked. "I'm sorry, sir, there's no employee by that name." Martin's voice dropped an octave. "Check again." "I already did," the man said, smiling thinly. "We have no record. In fact, our last shift ended at 10 p.m. No one stayed after that." The call ended. Martin turned to Holt. "Payroll records. Cross-check her name against the vendor list." Holt's fingers raced across the keyboard. "Nothing. No Lena Carter in staff, contract, or vendor files. If she was there, she's been scrubbed." The word scrubbed echoed through the room. On the center screen, a recovered fragment suddenly appeared, a single glitching frame from the lost footage. It showed a figure entering the back hallway of the restaurant, face obscured by motion blur. The figure knelt near a terminal, inserted something metallic, and the feed cut to black. Martin stepped forward, studying the shape. "Can you enhance that?" "Not enough pixels," Holt said. "But whoever did it knew our systems. They wiped the trail the way our people do. Corporate-level clearance." "Internal?" She nodded slowly. "Higher than me." Martin stared at the black screen. He felt the air tighten in his chest. Someone inside his own empire had gone out of their way to bury one waitress and a 30-second piece of video. That kind of effort wasn't about a misunderstanding. It was about danger. He looked down at the folded check slip in his hand, its creases deepening with sweat. The inked numbers, 2719, seemed to pulse under the control room light, as if mocking him. For the first time, he understood what Lena's warning might have meant. It wasn't just run from danger. It was run before the silence reaches you too. He straightened. his reflection flickering on the dark screen. One man surrounded by his own machines, realizing they no longer answered only to him. The silence in the room wasn't empty anymore. It was watching. The city looked different when you stopped believing it was safe. Martin Veers parked beneath a flickering streetlight behind Harlow and Finch. The once elegant restaurant now drowned in rain and refuse. The air carried the sharp smell of oil and wet cardboard. Behind the building, the alley sloped into shadow, a space built to be unseen. He killed the engine. The sound of the rain filled the silence. No driver, no security detail, no entourage. Just the billionaire alone in a place his kind never visited. He stepped out, pulling his collar up. The restaurant's rear door hung half open, light spilling out across puddles and broken glass. The hum of the city seemed distant here, muffled by the storm. He scanned the alley. Overflowing bins lined the wall, dripping black water. Something white caught his eye, a scrap of fabric half buried beneath the trash bags. He crouched. It was an apron, soaked and crumpled, the restaurant's logo barely visible through the grime. On the pocket was a faint streak of blue ink, the same shade as the numbers on the check slip. He touched it with his thumb. The color bled into his skin. The rain thickened, steady as static. "Looking for her?" A voice rasped. Martin turned sharply. A man sat in the shadow of the dumpster, wrapped in layers of torn coats. His beard was wet, his eyes too clear for the streets. "Who?" Martin asked. The man smiled without warmth. "The woman who wore that." He pointed at the apron. "She said someone important would come asking. Told me to give him something." Martin hesitated. "When?" "Last night," the man said. "Right before the trucks came." "Trucks?" The man gestured toward the industrial road beyond the alley. "Big ones, unmarked. They took boxes out the back door. She hid when they came. Then she gave me this." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small USB stick, wrapped in plastic, tied with a red rubber band. He held it out with a trembling hand. She said, "Give it to the man who looks guilty." Martin didn't move. The rain hit the plastic, ticking like a clock. "Why me?" he asked quietly. The man shrugged. "You look like you got something to confess." The words landed heavier than they should have. Martin reached out and took the drive. It felt colder than metal should, too light, too dangerous. "What's on it?" he asked. "Didn't look," the man said. "Didn't need to." Martin slipped the USB into his pocket beside the folded check slip. The two objects pressed together, paper and plastic, truth and evidence. A billionaire's empire reduced to a few ounces of weight. He looked again at the apron, now plastered to the wet pavement. Lena's world, the night shift, the silence, the courage, reduced to a single ruined cloth. He thought of her voice. "Run now." The rain eased into drizzle. A police siren wailed somewhere far away. The alley fell still. Martin turned toward his car, every step echoing louder than it should. When he opened the door, he saw his reflection in the window. Hair soaked, eyes unguarded, face drawn tight with fear. In his pocket, the USB pressed against his heart like a pulse. Whatever was inside it, he knew it would end the life he had built, and maybe the one she had tried to save. He started the car. The headlights sliced through the fog. Behind him, the alley disappeared into darkness, leaving only the faint outline of a white apron drifting in the rain. The screen lit up like an open wound. Martin Veers sat alone in his study, the city's skyline flickering through the glass behind him. The small USB drive, the one handed to him in the rain, clicked into the port. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a single folder appeared on the screen. It was labeled in plain text, "If you're him." His heartbeat quickened. He double-clicked. A video opened. The picture was shaky at first, then steadied. Lena Carter appeared, framed by the dim light of what looked like a storage room. Her restaurant apron was gone. She wore a plain jacket and looked exhausted but calm. Her eyes went straight to the lens. "If you're watching this," she began, "then you were the one I warned." Martin froze. She continued, voice steady, eyes unwavering. "I didn't want to believe it, but your company, Veers Global, is responsible for what's coming. You don't know it yet, or maybe you do and you've stopped looking, but the evidence is here." She turned the camera toward a laptop screen. Rows of files appeared, spreadsheets, memos, inspection reports. Her finger pointed to highlighted entries. "These are the dumps," she said. "Waste sites near Eastlake. They said it was temporary containment. It's not. The chemicals have been leaking into the water for months." The scene cut. New clip. A blurred shot of a meeting room, voices low, nervous. A man said, "We'll classify the losses as structural failure, cheaper than litigation." Another voice added, "The dam's already cracked. It won't last through next quarter's rains." Martin leaned forward. His breath caught. Eastlake wasn't just any district, it was where his company had built low-cost housing projects, the same ones he'd used in press releases as proof of social investment. Lena's face returned to the screen. "They know the dam is failing. They've hidden it in the maintenance budget. When it collapses, it will flood the whole neighborhood. People will die, but the insurance payouts will cover the losses and boost your stock. They called it a calculated risk." She looked away for a moment, voice shaking now. "You built something powerful, Mr. Veers, but it became a machine that eats silence and spits out profit. I'm not doing this to destroy you. I'm doing it to give you a chance to be the man you probably wanted to be before the world taught you not to care." Martin's hand trembled on the desk. The video flickered again. Lena leaned closer to the camera, her eyes filling the screen. "If you get this, it means I failed to reach you in person. But you still have a choice. You can stop this. The dam breaks tomorrow." Static. Then the video ended. The silence in the room was complete. Martin sat frozen, his reflection staring back at him from the black screen. A man who had spent a lifetime polishing the surface while the foundation rotted beneath. He replayed her last line in his mind. "You still have a choice." He rose slowly, walking to the window. The city glowed with wealth built on the illusion of control. Every tower he owned, every speech he gave, every applause he'd received, it all balanced on the same kind of silence Lena had refused to keep. His empire suddenly felt hollow. He opened the folder again, scrolling through the data. The evidence was overwhelming. Internal memos, falsified safety reports, bribes to inspectors. He saw signatures, some his, some forged in his name. It wasn't just a scandal. It was a reckoning. He reached for his phone, then stopped. Who could he trust? Everyone around him was paid to look away. For the first time in years, Martin realized how small power felt when truth entered the room. He looked back at the USB drive, lying beside the folded check slip. Paper and plastic, 2 warnings from the same woman who had risked everything for a chance at decency. He whispered, "She didn't tell me to run. She'd told him to act." Martin straightened, his decision settling like steel in his voice. Tomorrow, he would make sure the world saw what she had seen. And for once, silence would not be his ally. Truth doesn't whisper. It breaks like glass. By dawn, Martin Veers had already chosen his side. The decision was silent, clean, irreversible. He uploaded every file from the USB drive, Lena's recordings, the memos, the dam reports, onto 3 encrypted servers. Then he sent them to 2 places that could never be bought: the Federal Regulator's Office and the International Press Wire. He hit send without ceremony. The act took less than a minute. The sound of the mouse click was small, but it split his life in 2. Within an hour, his world caught fire. Phones lit up across the tower. Screens filled with headlines. Veers Global under investigation. Insider leak reveals cover-up. The company's board demanded answers. Investors panicked. And by noon, security guards were escorting executives through lobbies now filled with reporters. "Martin, please," his legal advisor begged over the speakerphone. "We can manage the damage. Just say it was a breach. Say you were hacked." He didn't answer. On his screen, the live news feed showed his own face. File photo, confident smile, perfect lighting. Beneath it ran the headline, "CEO or whistleblower." Every word Lena had recorded was now public. Her voice, calm and sure, played on air. "If you get this, you still have a choice." Reporters called it the confession file. Millions streamed it. To some, it was courage. To others, betrayal. By late afternoon, Martin's private line filled with threats. Board members called him a traitor. Former allies spoke to the media about erratic behavior. The machine he had built was eating him alive. Still, he felt lighter than he had in years. When he looked out his office window, the skyline no longer shimmered. It trembled. He could see storm clouds building over the East Lake district, where the dam stood like a gray scar across the horizon. The same dam Lena had warned about. He whispered, "It's not over." That night, flood warnings broke across the networks. A low tremor rippled through East Lake at 11:17 p.m., first mistaken for thunder, then for construction. But those who lived nearby knew the sound of something giving way. The dam cracked open under weeks of pressure and years of neglect. Water burst through concrete, turning roads into rivers. Emergency alerts blared across the city, but because of the leak, because of Lena's evidence, authorities had already begun partial evacuations. The shelters, hastily set up in school gyms, filled with families clutching children and soaked belongings. Fewer lives were lost than anyone expected. Reporters called it a near catastrophe. Martin called it mercy. He sat in his car overlooking the distant chaos. Sirens wailed. Helicopters blinked red across the clouds. The city below seemed to glow with a strange mix of ruin and relief. He turned on the radio. A journalist was reading a new statement. The waitress who provided the original evidence is still missing. Her name, Lena Carter, appears on no official record. Investigators found traces of her belongings near the flooded perimeter. Martin closed his eyes. The image of her face filled his mind, tired but fearless, like someone who had already accepted the cost of truth. He reached into his coat and unfolded the check slip, its paper now soft and worn. The blue ink had faded, but the numbers, 2719, remained, etched like a code into his conscience. Outside, water roared through the streets, sweeping away debris and neon signs, washing the filth from the gutters. It was destruction and cleansing at once, the world collapsing and renewing in the same breath. He stepped out into the rain, letting it soak his suit, his skin, everything false. For years he'd ruled through silence. Now the flood carried that silence away. Above the noise, he thought he heard her voice again, soft but certain. Run now. He finally understood. It hadn't been a warning to escape. It had been a warning to face it before it consumed them all. Martin looked toward the horizon where the dam had stood. Water still poured through the breach, silver in the moonlight, relentless and pure. He whispered to the empty air, "You were right, Lena." Then he stood still as the storm passed over him, letting the world wash itself clean. The flood had taken buildings, cars, and names, but not memory. 3 months later, Martin Veers sat beneath the harsh lights of the Senate chamber. The man who once ruled a trillion-dollar empire now waited his turn to speak. The cameras hummed quietly. Rows of officials stared down from the dais. The world was listening for his confession, not his defense. The chairwoman's voice cut through the air. "Mr. Veers, you understand you're under oath?" "I do." "Then please explain in your own words how your company concealed the East Lake data and the dam's safety reports." He took a slow breath. For years, truth had been his enemy. Something to hide, manage, or price. Now it was all he had left. "We didn't hide the truth," he said evenly. "We buried it. In forms, in language, in meetings that pretended to solve problems but only shifted them away from sight. I signed documents that softened disasters into events. We called lies strategy. We taught silence to look professional." Murmurs rippled across the room. Martin looked down at his hands. They no longer trembled. "I thought control was safety. I thought quiet meant stability. But it only built a wall between us and consequence." He paused. "When the dam failed, that wall fell, and so did everything behind it." He didn't mention Lena by name, yet her voice filled every space between his sentences. "You still have a choice." A senator leaned forward. "And what would you say to the families displaced by your company's actions?" Martin met the man's eyes. "That they taught me what accountability means, and that it should have come from me first." The chamber went silent. For once no lawyer interrupted. No aide slid him a note. His words stood alone, plain, human, unpolished. When the gavel struck to adjourn, cameras flashed like small explosions. Reporters shouted questions, but Martin walked out without answering. The air outside felt cleaner than he remembered. Across the city, in the heart of the Eastlake district, the ground still smelled faintly of silt and rust. Where water once raged, crews now rebuilt. New walls, new bridges, new hope. At the corner of a rebuilt playground stood a small memorial of black stone. It read, Lena Carter, for the warning that saved lives. Below it, smaller text, presumed lost in the Eastlake flood. Someone had left fresh flowers, white lilies bound with a ribbon. Martin stood there quietly. His coat flapped in the wind. Around him, children laughed, their voices high and defiant against the memory of disaster. He stared at the inscription, his reflection faintly visible on the polished surface. She had no grave, no recorded history, no salary, no official title, yet her name, once erased, was now carved into stone. For the first time he realized the strange justice in that. She had spoken truth in whispers, and it had outlived every boardroom he'd built. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the old check slip, the one from that night. The inked numbers were almost gone now, washed pale by time. He placed it gently at the base of the memorial, then turned away. That evening, Martin drove back to Harlow and Finch. The restaurant had never reopened. Its windows were boarded, the sign half faded. Inside, dust covered the furniture like a thin snowfall. He stepped through the broken door, the smell of old wood and rain filling the air. Light streamed through a crack in the ceiling. Landing squarely on table 14, the place where it had all begun. On the table lay a single item, a blank check slip, clean and folded, untouched by dust. He stared at it, unsure who had left it there. Maybe a worker, maybe no one. Maybe it was just time completing its circle. He picked it up. The paper was crisp, pure white, an empty ledger. No numbers, no name, no lie. For a long moment he held it between his fingers, the way one might hold a fragile truth. The silence around him wasn't oppressive anymore. It was peaceful, like breath after confession. He understood now that redemption didn't mean erasing the past. It meant living differently because of it. He set the slip back on the table, perfectly centered, and whispered, "Account settled." Then he walked out into the fading light. The sky above the city was clear again, washed clean by the same water that had destroyed so much. Somewhere beneath that vast calm, truth had survived, not because of power, but because one voice refused to stay silent, and that, Martin thought, was the real rebuilding.